I'd now like to welcome Professor Stephen Lord, Professor at Neuroscience Research Australia, who will be leading us in the plenary session this morning. Thank you, Stephen.
Excuse me. Thank you very much, Lorraine, and also thanks to Jackie for that very memorable opening. Okay, on with the show now, and we have our first speaker. And as Jackie mentioned, we're very lucky and delighted to have Sallie Lamb with us here today. So, all the way from the UK. She's been out here on a rehabilitation conference and is staying over to speak with us today. So Sallie is the Pro-Vice-Chancellor and Executive Dean of the Faculty of Health at the University of Exeter in the UK. And why we're very lucky to have her is because she has been working in the area of fall prevention for a long time, as well as doing many other areas of research. She's an expert in clinical trials and all sorts of other methodology, including fall prevention. And so she's got a broad range of excellent skills that will be very useful for us to gain from today. And she's speaking on something very topical, preventing falls in community dwelling populations, new approaches. So please welcome Sallie.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm sorry, I'm not dressed quite as normal kind of European would be at a conference, but I've been absolutely soaked to the skin over the last 3 days, and I now have no dry clothes left. So, yeah, I didn't pack properly for the trip, unfortunately. I put shorts in. I don't on earth wonder why I did that, but anyway. So yeah, I'm going to talk, actually, I'm going to do a slightly different talk than I perhaps normally do. You know, very often I'm kind of passing information over and we have some discourse. I'm actually going to present some really very new work that we're doing on trying to understand why falls happen. And importantly, what we're really trying to tease out is what information is useful in clinical practice. So quite a lot of what I present today won't be a finished piece of work. It's actually an ongoing piece of work. And I'm really keen to get your feedback, you know, either during this session or afterwards, on what new information and what new insights you think will be helpful as we go forwards. I'm of course going to be a bit controversial, but Jackie would be disappointed if I wasn't. Okay, so let's see. The first thing I'm going to say is that we can prevent falls, and we absolutely can. And it is absolutely worthwhile for us to implement the evidence that we have at the moment. But I'm going to say that we're not, what I say, very good at it. So we can prevent falls, but we can't prevent a very large number of falls. And we've really got to think now about how we improve what we do. How do we improve on it? How do we prevent more falls? How do we reach out further? So implementation is some of that kind of answer, but not all of it. We still very much need to have an active research base, is my contention, and that we need to think about falls much more and learn more about them so that we can improve. So I'm just going to draw a little bit on the evidence so that we kind of all start from the same place. So I've been an author of the Cochrane Reviews over many, many years, probably as long as Jackie had her falls clinic. In fact, I think that was the first conference where Jackie and I met. It was probably about 30 years ago when I was presenting the early Cochrane Review work. And we can argue a little bit about by exactly how much, but if you look at the Cochrane estimates, they'd say that we can reduce about 23% of falls through exercise. And if we look into higher risk groups, that goes a little bit higher to 30%. 26% through home hazard reduction, again higher if we go into a higher risk group, remembering that sometimes these higher risk groups are actually quite difficult to find. And we can prevent about 23% of the multifactorial, through the multifactorial fall prevention strategies. So it's approximately on a kind of conservative type of basis. And I use the conservative estimate because the evidence tells us quite a lot about what happens in different people's hands. So not just, you know, kind of really expert hands, but when you start to hand this over, we're looking at about a quarter to a third of falls being prevented. And I drew this into a graph, which I actually showed at the conference that I was just talking at. So this is the absolute number of falls prevented from the Cochrane reviews. And what you can see in the blue lines, there we go, is the numbers of falls that are happening on average in the control groups across all of those studies. And there are a lot of studies now for community dwelling populations. There's nearly 200 randomized controlled trials and 200,000 people randomized into those studies. So we can see from this graph, first of all, that actually it's really interesting to see where these different interventions get used. So it's probably not unsurprising to us. What we see with MFFP is it's used in higher risk populations, but it's substantially higher risk, actually. And exercise, on average, we see quite a broad range, but on average used in quite lower risk groups. Multiple interventions, that's when we layer over several different types of interventions rather than target them in a slightly higher risk group, and home hazard modification here. This is the high-risk home hazard modification from the most recent Cochrane review. And indeed, if we were to look at Kathy Sherrington's recent review looking at higher risk exercise programs, we'd see a similar type of kind of rate as here. What you can see in the orange is actually the number of falls that we prevent. So the difference between the orange and the blue bars are the numbers of people, the number of falls that are still happening. And my contention is that whilst it is very worthwhile for us to prevent those falls, absolutely every fall prevented is a really good result. We're actually not getting, kind of as far into the problem as we should do. And certainly when I finish my career, what I really want to happen is that the last trial that I do prevents at least 50% of the falls. I think we need to raise our ambitions now about how effective our interventions are. So another aspect of this is also what happens when we move our interventions away from perhaps our own community where we're all very committed to falls prevention, and indeed we're all really quite experienced at doing it. So we might follow a protocol, but we're also very experienced. We can spot a problem. It's actually more disappointing when we move some of these interventions out. And there have been two recent large-scale studies, one done by our group and one done by the group of Tom Gill in the USA, which looked at very much larger sample sizes because they were using fracture as the endpoint. That really helps us because we do have some problem in fall prevention studies because they're in essence open label studies. That means that the participants know what they're getting and are also self-reporting the outcome. And, there is some influence, which we don't know which direction that goes in. We could potentially influence the reporting of falls. I suspect it's why we see some kind of difference in the outcomes across different studies. But these studies used fractures as the endpoint or serious injuries. The STRIDE study used 86 family practices, and our PREFIT study in England used 63 general practices, so general practitioners and family practice, 9,803 participants. Both studies, despite having a disappointing result, were published in the New England Journal of Medicine. I don't understand why, but anyway, strange things happen to researchers sometimes. And what did the results of our PREFIT study say? Well, they said that we could reduce falls, actually, in the exercise arm. It didn't happen in the multifactorial fall prevention arm. So we were able to have some kind of short-term reduction. Remember, so once we go into 63 practices, what we're doing is we're training the practices to deliver the interventions. And we did that in a really good way. But they are then, kind of responsible for the decisions that they make. So this was okay. I was pleased that we did manage to reduce falls. But like many other studies, we used a relatively short period of intervention. Certainly in the UK, we suffer the same as you do in Australia with this very downward pressure on our resourcing. So realistically, we can't resource extremely long programs. We have to think of ways of moving people into community settings, of getting them to love exercise so that they'll do it and sustain it themselves, which is not entirely straightforward. And this is really what happens in the real world. So whilst you're intervening during this period, you can see a downward reduction in the falls rate. But once you stop intervening in the kind of classic sense, i.e. away from the health services, the fall rate begins to rise again. So we have a challenge definitely with that. There was no effect on fractures, very disappointing. And it was really, we learnt a lot, which I won't go into in too much detail about, kind of what happens to people and why do things go wrong. And I have to say, the underpinning belief set of the practitioners in primary care, I think, is pretty integral. So they were asking people to stop exercising. Any sign of a problem, then it was stop. So I think we need to kind of really influence a broad church of people if we want to get these types of interventions implemented. So we should implement what we know to be effective in most hands, and this is just really a background. So I want to move on because I do actually think that we are coming to a renaissance point in falls. And the thing that is going to open up a whole series of new kind of knowledge about falls is sensors, and it will also open up the potential for a whole new series of interventions, which hopefully would be much more precision type of interventions, so much more fitted around the individual, potentially much more kind of capable of being implemented within your own home. You only have to think of things like the Zoe app if you're a diabetic, kind of suddenly all of this power comes to you through the benefit of a sensor. So what we've started doing is to really try to explore more about the etiology of falls through sensors. If we think about the epidemiology base, which we used 30 years ago to design interventions, so what generally happens in an epidemiological study is that we take a cohort of older people and we assess them at baseline and follow them over a 1-year period. Now, many of the studies that we use to look at falls risk factors and identify them were actually very large cohort studies from the United States. And they're used to identify a broad range of diseases and disease risks, not just falls. So they're a little bit broad brush. Everything that is measured with care, but it's not, kind of a complete set of information by any means. Also, what happens then is that we just find out at 1 year later, has that person fallen within a year? And from that information, we calculate, well, this is a risk factor, and this is how the multifactorial fall prevention risk profiles were developed. Now, if you think about it, that's quite a crude way of doing things. We don't know anything, actually, about when that person fell in the year. We don't know what happened in the 2 or 3 weeks before the fall. We don't know what happened in the hour before the fall. So we have what I call quite a blunt scientific basis for us to be able to identify the core and important components of different interventions. This could change the way, but it's not been straightforward. So in here is an iPhone. It's just strapped around the back, and a colleague of mine from Germany, Clemens Becker, had the foresight about 10 years ago to do a very, very difficult project, and it was a first ever project to do this. He wanted to strap iPhones around people's middles, send them home for a week and see what happened. Would they fall? And could the iPhones, or what is actually a Samsung, sorry, not an iPhone, could the phone, I'll try not to call it an iPhone from now on, could the phone actually capture this or not? And it was a really difficult project for them to do. So what happened was that they did. They managed to capture 220 real-life falls. And like I say, this is absolutely new information. We'd never had this before. Steve Rabinovich had been able to capture some falls in nursing homes on CCTV, but this was the first community dwelling, free world type of information. And what you've got inside your Samsung Galaxy is a triaxial accelerometer, a gyroscope, a magnetometer, which is like a compass, and it samples at 100 hertz, and it could record for 7 days. We also, importantly, took a short narrative from each of the participants, so it was only a sentence on what happened around the fall time. Now, I kind of always say it's really interesting what a phone can do, and your kind of teenagers probably don't like being tracked. Also, you could, if you really wanted to, find out what position they were in at any one time. So they could actually tell you a little more than they currently do. And it's this capability that we went ahead to use and try and kind of work out what's been going on. Ooh, right, okay. Let's make sure that we don't click over this slide. So we get 3 different traces from this phone. And basically you can see here, because all the traces are together at time 0, we can see that this person here, who's headed to have a fall, just in case you haven't worked that one out yet, he's standing, and this is the 20 seconds before the fall. And we know from the narrative that he's provided us that actually he said to us, I was walking and I wanted to open the door. I had to press the door button. So we know that he was headed towards the door, and he wanted to reach out and press the button, and that is when the fall happened. So that was a tiny little sentence, but what you can see in that 20 seconds, now if somebody says to me, I was walking to, I went to the door, I wanted to walk to the door and press the button and open the door, I'd think, okay, that means you want to walk in a straight line. It would be the first assumption that I'd make. I wouldn't be thinking that lots of different things had happened during that time period. But it transpires that actually what happened was that he did a few turns. And we're beginning to find out that actually people turn a lot more than we had thought in the 20 seconds before they fall. So what we've seen in other traces is as people get out of a chair, they actually stand and turn as they come out of a chair. Or if they're getting into a chair, they're very often turning as they get into a chair. And if any of you are PTs in the room, you'll know that we kind of train sit to stand in that straightforward way. We don't train it in that curved type of way. So these are actually beginning to give us some real insight. So this guy had kind of stood, then turned a few more times. And I think actually probably what he's doing is he's trying to sight where the button is on the door frame. So he's got a purpose and intention here. And he's trying to look around and sight it as he's moving towards the door. Then he does, as things start to go really wrong, and we can see if people are stumbling or what have you, he starts to move very quickly and he gives a reactive turn, and it's a super fast turn, and that's him trying to steady himself, and then he lands on the floor. So this is a type of insight that we're beginning to be able to accumulate, and what we've done with this is that we've started to be able to kind of wrap we've got many of these traces. And what we can see here, this is called a Sankey plot. I'm not too sure how easy it is to understand, but it gives me some information. What we see is we see these common transitions, stand to turn. You can see it again here, stand to turn. And we can see here, turn to instability, turn to instability. Some people take the reactive turn. And because this is a person with ataxia, we know that people fall backwards very easily. We can see the direction of the fall here as well. So we're beginning to try to build up a kind of like picture of common movements in that 20 seconds before the fall event. And I hope that this gives us some insight into how we could improve our training programs and think about that a little bit more. Same thing for people with PSP. We see a little bit of difference across different areas, and I'm not going to show you all of the traces. It would take absolutely forever, but it just gives you an idea of where we're going with this. The other thing that we've seen in the data that we have is that there's quite a bit of interaction with environmental hazards. And I think we know this, but I was a little surprised by the types of environmental hazards that people have reported back to us. So static chairs are a particular difficulty, and static furniture is a difficulty. And what we're finding is that there's an equivalent of a kind of a ground reaction force. You'll have to excuse me, I'm not the world's best biomechanist. As people press off furniture to give themselves a lift in the real world, sometimes the reactive force that comes off that press is enough to, kind of set them off on the pathway of having a fall. So again, I'm not going to say that I can confirm this to you today. I wouldn't want you to go away and start thinking, oh yeah, I'm going to change this or that. This is early days for us. I'm interested to kind of, as we go through the day, just get a bit of feedback from you about what you think about this information and what type of information is useful. 80% of people can accurately report either the initial direction of the fall or the landing direction. So I found this also quite interesting, but they use language in a very lay type of way. So if they say I'm walking to, they kind of mean I was traveling from A to B, and I'm going to say I was walking, but actually was doing a whole load of other things. So there is information in what people say, and it is accurate, but it's not complete. Now, why is this important? Well, we've seen Stephen's group and others, kind of begin to think about new ways of training people, and there's lots of new things happening, and you can see in a minute or two what we're going to do as well. So this is just sliding plates, so trying to perturb people as they're walking, similar type of thing on a treadmill, perturbing people. But I think what we're beginning to get some insight of is that the perturbation may not always come from underfoot. It may come from other areas in the environment as people interact with the environment. Those are just the things about the environmental interactions. So this is a new piece of work that we've just started on, and I'm coming towards the end of my presentation now so that you can hopefully be reassured. We want to start to explore better how we can make, kind of interventions that really look both at the body and the brain and how they're interacting. Now, we're not the first. In fact, the New South Wales groups have been here and started on this already. But we would like to take it up a level at Exeter. And we have a massive force platform, which this force platform can actually vibrate, tilt in any direction, drop. So we're able to recreate quite a lot of different environments. We're going to combine this with virtual reality, with embedded eye tracking, and the eye tracking, I think, is a really interesting piece, certainly seeing what people are looking at. We've noticed already in some of our Parkinson's work that the eye tracking freezes before people actually freeze, so we're getting some really good insights, some integrated brain scanning, lots of different things to help us work out what's happening in the body. This is could you play the video for me? There's a video with the guy on the left and also a video on the right. Oh, that wasn't me. If you click on it, I think. Yeah, that's it. Oh, don't worry. Don't worry, it's okay. All right, so we've got a whole series of layered experiments where we want to recreate environments. In the VR headset, we can do this really well, and then to kind of challenge people in different ways in the environment on the force platform with fully integrated body motion so that we can start to really work out what's happening as people are put under stress in the types of environment that lead to falls. And this is why the work that I showed you on the sensors around the middle is so vitally important, because we have to understand those environments and kind of situations that people are experiencing when they have a fall. So yeah, that's an exciting piece of work that we're up to, and I'd be really interested to hear what people think of that. And we're hoping to make some breakthroughs in functional neuroscience, and we've got lots of things that we want to do with this. But like I say, I think I can summarize it in saying I'm not doing so many clinical trials as I used to. I pick and choose now. But I really do want that last clinical trial that I do in my career to really make a substantial breakthrough in falls. And I know that many of my colleagues in this room are hoping for the same thing. So thank you very much for the opportunity to share my data.
Okay, we do have a few minutes for questions, and if anyone's tuning in virtually, please put your question through Slido and we'll be able to ask them too. I guess I'll start off by, we know we can prevent falls more than 20% with exercise if it's the stimulus is there, if it's moderate to high stimulus, and also if it's ongoing. We might get to 40%. What are you going to put in your package to get the extra 10%, to get to 50?
I suspect that what will go into the package is information that is more about the perception, the environmental perception. So what I'm hoping will be yielded is kind of some more information. I think we may end up training eye tracking and kind of reaction, as it were, so recognition of a situation, because I think this is one of the difficulties. I don't think people, it's too late when they recognise they're in trouble. We need people to be able to recognise the situation without making them, horribly frightened of it, and then to be able to kind of implement some preventive action during that short time period. So, I mean, we don't know which way the science will take us at the end of the day, but I think that is definitely one way that we will go.
Are there any questions? One down here.
I'll ask a quick one, and I think it's related to your answer just now, but the lab with the big moving platform and the eye tracking looks fantastic for getting detailed information about what people are doing and responding to perturbations. But I know that you're interested in implementation and preventing falls at scale. So how is this information going to feed into that?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. The lab is about gaining the scientific insight for us to be able to design programs. You'll have seen on Work Package 5, the idea is that we will translate this into new interventions. I think there's a lot of potential in VR headsets, kind of really providing a stimulus. Maybe we're working with quite a lot of sports scientists who use VR for training, training in precision. Motor precision. So that's certainly one way that we think that we would be able to make some progress. But, until we've done the science to kind of hold that out, we can't be sure, but that's what I would hope. How we integrate that with exercise will be interesting to see, and it should be an integrated program. We can't be asking people to do, layer on layer on layer of stuff, and we are not the only people who are asking people to do things. Once you get older, you're much more likely to have, for instance, type 2 diabetes, and believe you me, I'm one of those people. You have to do this and that and this and that and this and that on that, and this blood test and all the rest of it. You could spend your whole day doing stuff. So we've got to kind of think how we integrate, and also not only just around falls, but around all of these other chronic diseases, so that we can kind of hopefully provide a package that prevents falls, but also addresses some of the other issues that are beneficial to some of these broader chronic diseases. I hope that made sense.
I should take one question from Slido. Which one would you like? You've got 4 to choose from there. We won't be able to go to all of them, but how about the first one? Are there any studies including turning training incorporated into interventions?
So yes, a long time ago, and Jackie may remember this lady, Janet Simpson. Do you remember Janet Simpson? Yeah. I mean, she was really into turning, and she was really into turning, wasn't she? And so yes, there are some studies that have looked at turning, but it was very rudimentary, and I think it's just got lost a little bit over the years. And the work that Janet did, I would say, is much more on the rehab end. It was, people who were really frail and really could not even begin to initiate a turn. So the answer to that is yes, but nowhere near enough. I mean, it's really interesting, I think, to think about rotation and turning. It's probably the most difficult movement to retain your centre of mass and control. And I suspect a lifetime, we're busy training the legs and not thinking about the trunk as much. A lifetime of not looking after your trunk muscles properly also probably renders you not very capable of turning.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. I think it's fascinating looking at the eye tracking. I wondered whether there was any connection or studies being done on head turning and the importance that has.
Sorry, say that again.
Whether there's been any studies done on head turning?
Well, there have been a small number of studies done on head turning. So we see these things come into the literature and then they kind of go out. I think one of the difficulties is that we've not been able to consistently study them. Kind of even 5 years ago, to do a full body motion capture and to get this data parameterized, get it down to something we can understand that means. It was a huge amount of work. And I've certainly seen some small amounts of work on head control, but not an enormous body of work. Would you say that's the same?
I agree. Also, you might want to have a chat with Jasmine afterwards with the work she did with dizziness and vestibular rehabilitation and how that's also involved with position of the head and the vestibulo-ocular reflex. I think we need to stop. Thank you very much, Sally. And, before we go.